All right, I am going to get started. I know people are still logging on. I'm so excited about today. Happy St. Patrick's Day to everyone. Those of you wearing green, I'm super proud of you. All right, Michael. It's getting to you. He's ready. So I'm super excited about today, and I just want to thank you all for coming, of course. And I always like to start with wins. Anyone have anything that they want to share? Something cool that's going on in their business, personal win, anything?
Listing appointment.
Ooh, Herman's got a listing appointment. Where are you going? What city? Rosedale.
Little ways away, it's a sell by situationship.
Okay, situationship. Herman said it's a sell by situationship in Rosedale. So is that today?
It's gonna be next week. He got surgery, shoulder surgery.
Oh,
So he
let us know what surgeon he uses. Got a couple guys down and out right now. All right, that's a good win. Anybody else? Mike.
2 listings appointments on Monday, both the record, and then I have a closing next week and hoping for another third close today or Monday.
Awesome. So Michael's got 2 listing appointments next week. That's exciting. 1 closing, hopefully, and what did you say? And hopefully another third close soon. Nice. All right. Anyone else? Anyone? Shane,
I have 3 listing appointments this weekend.
Mary? Was that Mary?
Yeah, I had 3 listing appointments this weekend.
Awesome. Good job, girl.
Yep, I did the trade fair last weekend and picked up 2 of those are from that, and then one of it's my husband's coworker.
Hey, I love those. That's awesome. I love when you do things and they actually turn out, right?
Yes. Yep.
That's why you always try something new, because you never know, business could come from anywhere. Anyone else have anything? Talking about wins for anyone just logging in. No? Okay. So today I was honored actually to have my mentor, Joe Maher, come today. He is 50% Irish, so I thought it would be appropriate. And beyond that, like, I just feel like he is literally, and I call him this and he gets a little mad at me. I feel like, not mad, that's the wrong word. I call him the GOAT because I do feel like he is one of the greatest of all times. I'm not even kidding. I'm like, he is compassionate. He is a huge heart. He's humble, which you'll see over and over. He flew under the radar in the business, but was highly successful. When you like Google him, you'll maybe find 1 picture of him. I think maybe 2, maybe. Yeah. He's tried to pay Google off to just get that off completely. Never had his photo on his business card, didn't do a lot of advertising as he got further in the business. And just, I mean, to me, like, that's huge, giant referral-based business, which I loved. And an excellent reputation among realtors. I mean, literally, if I ask anyone, I mean, Jim, you've been in the business a long time.
He's a consummate professional.
Yes, professional. I mean, everyone knows who he is. Michael, have you ever heard a bad word about Joe in all of your years of business? No. Lisa could probably attest to that too. She's been in business a long time. Those of you who are newer, you may not have heard of him, but I'm telling you, any agent that I've told he's my mentor, like, oh, what a great guy. My old brokers, my, like, whoever you talk to, I just an impeccable reputation, which is just phenomenal. Beyond that, he was licensed in 1994 after 25 years in a completely different career, sales related. He's welcome to talk about it if he wants to. He was a broker right here in Wyandotte for a while. He was at Century 21. All but 1 day of his career, he was with the same brokerage. He was at one company for one day and then promptly left. And then stayed with Century 21 as a full-time agent for 26 years. He started, he was from Southwest Detroit. He started down here, downriver, making Wyandotte his primary area, and he had 0 sphere. He knew nobody. He had no contacts whatsoever. And at one point got up to 81 active listings at once, which I feel like was pretty phenomenal.
Holy crap.
Yeah. I'm sorry. Oh yeah, I know. I'm like, I'll have like 6 and I'll be like, I'm sweating. I'm like panicked. Like, Mary Baker is an iPhone. So in 2017, I feel like is when I started to really get to know him. I looked back to see if I could find a transaction that we had prior to that, but this one stood out to me. I had this guy, kind of a cold call that had come in. I think he was actually a Zillow lead from way back in the day. And he said that he wanted to be on Grow Zeal and wanted to be on the water. And so I set him up on a search in Realcom, and for 2 years, just send him homes automatically. He calls me one day and he says, oh, I want to see this property on Meridian. And I was like, oh, okay. I think it was Meridian. Yes. And I was like, okay. And we go look at it, and it was exactly what he was looking for. I showed him one house. It was $410,000 and he paid cash for it. And yeah, competed multiple offers. He could have gone mortgage or cash, but he had the cash to do it, and cash is ultimately won. And I remember being at the closing table, and I remember him complimenting me in front of my client about what a great agent I was. And I was like, wow, that felt really nice. Like, that was so nice. And we had just an amazing transaction. I was like, wow, that was really great. And I had such a good feeling leaving that closing, and the whole way through we worked as a team. And afterwards, I was talking to Chris Bajacki at the office one day, and I had talked about Joe. He goes, oh my gosh, he had the strangest thing. He complimented me at the table in front of my clients. And I was like, wow, I feel really good. I was like, that's a great thing, right? And I started implementing that immediately after that. Like, I'm like, because we are all doing such a difficult job, and no one understands it like another realtor, the highs, the lows, the struggles, the good, the bad, all of that. And so to me, I'm like, we should be complimenting each other. If we make it through all of the hurdles that it takes to get to the closing table, it's huge, right? There's, all the different personalities, title, mortgage, a buyer, a seller, a husband, a wife, which could be complete opposites from each other, a realtor that's different than us. There's so many factors, that private home inspections and appraisals, there's so many things that come into play during the process from start to finish, that if you make it to the closing table, heck yeah, you should be high-fiving that other person, especially if they have a happy face. If you have happy buyer and a happy seller, everyone's getting paid, like all of the good things are occurring, like it doesn't get better than that. So then a couple of years later in 2019, we worked together again. Same thing, great transaction. It was a property on Vinewood in Wyandotte. And we had like a little hiccup after closing, and we worked through it and figured it out, and everything went fine and happy again and great at the closing table. And after through that couple of years, I really heard his name a lot. I saw his name on listing after listing. I was like, wow, this guy is really doing a great job. And I ended up after that closing asking if we could meet for lunch sometime, because I'd like to learn more about him and how he worked, because again, his reputation was impeccable. The amount of business he was doing was so impressive. And then we met for lunch and we talked so easily and had all of these things in common that I had no idea. So my family was from Southwest Detroit also. I had worked there for 14 years. So we had all of that in common and knew schools and restaurants and all these things. We were both foodies. We both have a similar sense of humor. We both have this genuine love for other people. We both come from a place of gratitude, and the way we are operating in business, and anyone who knows me knows, I wasn't even on Facebook or anything up until about 2 years ago. I was so there were so many things that in so many ways that we connected, that I just felt oh my gosh, this is a person that I want to learn from. And so since then, we've been connecting on a regular basis, and I just have learned endless amounts of things from him, and has become a close friend of my whole family, really. So Joe Maher.
Thank you. I'm a much more ordinary person than that introduction. Thank you.
Told me we're humble. Sorry.
No, it's-
I was like, you have to tell them at least 2 funny stories, please, because he tells great stories.
Thank you
He's
for
got a lot of
that.
experience.
So-
let's see one more thing.
Please.
I'm not done. The other thing I I have to shout this out too. So he is also one of the smartest men in the world. I swear, he always, again, he's humble. So, but he has got a brother who's an attorney, a brother who's a psychologist, right? And he's like, so he's like, the one, but he is fluent in Mandarin Chinese. He's got at least one master's degree, two.
Two masters.
Yeah, 2 master's degrees, super well read. And like he has been helping Aiden like study for his exam. And so he'll look at a question and he'll, without even seeing the answers, he'll be like, oh, that's this. And in 1996, I had a guy named Tim and he blah, blah, blah. And he would have a story connected. And Aiden was like, it's blowing my mind, Mom. I'm like looking at these questions and I'm like, I don't know. And he's that smart. Okay. And he's very humble. So
Way more ordinary than that. And kudos to Aiden, because there's been several questions that take me back to pre-licensing training that are completely out of my mind now. So we were doing ranges and tiers and acres, and Aiden got everyone correct and I had to rely on him. So it's all about learning curves. Thank you, Amy, for that beautiful introduction. And thank you, Mike, for hosting this and for me for being here. I appreciate it a lot. I'm a huge fan of Amy's. It's a mutual admiration society that we have. She's a phenomenal person first, and also a phenomenal mom and wife and realtor, and everything she does extremely well. And it's a privilege to know her. I wanted to start off with some news. And one of the things I loved about real estate, my background, everybody here has had a life before. I was just talking to her about this, a life before real estate. Everybody's got one. Mine was vintage and rare camera equipment. That's what I did for 20 years. And one of the things that drew me into real estate was that, much like photography, the learning curve in this industry is extremely steep. If you meet someone who tells you that they know what there is to know about real estate, they're fibbing to you, because every day I would be asked a question, and I managed for a long time, 25 realtors right here in Wyandotte. And it was amazing to me that every day I was learning something. Somebody was asking me a question that either I knew or I had to research to find the answer to. And the news changes and the world changes. And so I wanted to bring one piece of news that's real fresh. This happened yesterday. Governor Whitmer signed a bill. You might have heard about it, but for decades, people have been pushing for more inclusion within the Elliott-Larsen Act. And if you remember that from pre-licensing, that's what governs the civil rights of the state of Michigan. And she signed a law yesterday that now protects the LGBTQ community. Up until yesterday, prior to yesterday, you could legally discriminate against people who are LGBTQ. That was legal, and now, as of yesterday, it's illegal because of the law she signed. And it covers 3 sections in the law. It's sexual orientation, gender identity, and gender expression. Those 3 groups are now protected by law, and it's no longer illegal to discriminate against them. So fantastic law. Elliott-Larsen was in 1976. So to give you an idea, it's taken this long to still be inclusive of everybody that should be included in something like that. But the good news is it's law now. So if you have clients, family members, customers who are in that community, please let them know that that's happened if they're not aware of it. When I entered the business, this was 1984. I was taught that the first year that 90% of real estate was done by 10% of the realtors, which kind of blew my mind. I don't know what the numbers are anymore in real comp. I've been retired for a couple of years, but at one point it was 12 or 13,000 realtors. It might be as many as 14,000 now. I don't know. But if you think of the math of that, back then it was 90-10. Within a few years, they did more studies and they found that 93% of the business was done by 7% of the realtors. When I left the business, 95% of the business was being done by 5% of the realtors. And if you look around the landscape in terms of people that you know who are big producers, it's still skewing in that direction. There are people who are doing a tremendous amount of real estate. There's people who want to do a lot that are not doing that. So my goal when I heard first about the 90-10 number was, what are the 10% doing? And I still think that's really the essential question for realtors to ask themselves. So if it's 95-5 today, which I believe it to be, what are those 5% people doing that I'm not doing? You know, what can be done differently? How do I differentiate myself over those folks? And what advantage can I gain and edges can I gain by learning about what that 5% is doing? So where I landed was customer service. I came from that photography background, camera store background. That was the hallmark of what I did in that world. And so I simply brought that into real estate. And one of the things that I'd like to impress upon you today is doing the unexpected for people. It's easy to do the ordinary things that we're supposed to do, but I think sometimes when we go above and beyond and people recognize that, it brings dividends to us. And so, for instance, when I would have, this is dating myself, but we used to present offers in person. There was no e-signing. And so you had to be in front of people. And when the offer was accepted on one of your listings, you had to have the sellers sign them in your presence. There was no automatically signing it. Well, whenever I had families with little kids, and especially as the day got long, the tradition was among realtors was to have them come into the office because it was easier for the realtor, have them sign the papers and then, thank them for their business. I always made a point of going to the homes of people that had little kids at 6, 7, 8 o'clock at night, because I knew that was bedtime coming. And so it was a little thing. And all these things are going to sound silly, but they all add up to service. And so I would be at someone's home at 8:30 at night. They just put the 2 kids to bed. They could breathe. They could sign an offer. And they were so grateful that I was willing to do that for them. And I was grateful for the business. And so it was a way of thanking them for that business. I met, when I started training people in 1996, thereafter, anytime I met someone outside of Century 21, because that was our little world, that was really successful, I would ask them, can you give me one tidbit? Because I want to be teaching and training, and I'd love to, just one thing. And I'll never forget, I met a RE/MAX agent in Dearborn, and this guy woke up the 1st of January doing 20 million that year. He was just an unbelievable machine of real estate, and never varied from that. That was his number, 20 million. So I asked him, I said, I'd be grateful. And he goes, I can't tell you because it's going to sound dumb. I said, no, whatever it is, I'm going to take it back to the people I work with and train. And he said, I've told it to the young realtors here and they laugh at me when I tell them, but I said, no, I promise not to laugh. And he said, answer your phone. He said, I will see realtors who are complaining to me about their lack of business, and they're having a cup of coffee or they're having their lunch together and their phones are in front of them on the table and the phones ring and they automatically swipe it over to voicemail, not knowing necessarily who that is. It might be a client or a customer if it's a number they don't recognize. And he said, I don't understand that. He said, I know there's times in life where you can't answer your phone. He said, I'm just not saying 100% universally have to answer it. However, the analogy he gave me was like a store, and he and I had that same background. He was from retail and I was from retail. Your phone is your store to the world. If your phone's ringing and you don't answer it, the store is closed. If it's ringing and you answer it, the store is open and you're ready for business. And so, simple thing, do it as much as you can. Return calls and text and emails as promptly as you possibly can. What it does is just let that person know that you're taking their question seriously and their business seriously. That responsiveness, again, comes back in dividends, because I chaired the ethics committee and the grievance committee and for the Downriver Association of Realtors when we had that for years. And it was amazing the litany of complaints that I would hear from consumers and the public. And one of them was, I can never reach my realtor. And to me, that's a cardinal sin. If you're in this business, you have to be reachable and you have to return calls and messages promptly. I'm going to give you 3 bits of, by the way, I'm not selling anything today and I'm not a competitor of yours. And so you're not here to spend any money with me. So there's 3 pieces. No, nothing for me. So 3 pieces of advice. I'm going to start 3, 2, 1. This is the 3rd best advice I ever got. And it was from a man who owned a camera store in downtown Detroit that I ended up managing. And I was there for many years. And a tremendous boss, 50 years in the camera business, walking encyclopedia. And I said, first day of the job, I said, anything I need to know, any rules? And he said, there's just one. And he said, I want you to memorize. And I said, I'm ready. And he said, if someone asks you a question, this is your response if you don't know the answer. And the response was, I don't know, but I will ask someone who does. And he preached that to me. And he said, if I ever hear you guess and you guess wrong, we're going to have words. It's going to be a challenge for us. Because he said in photography, if someone's calling from their, this is again dating me, but if somebody's calling from their dark room, they're developing a roll of film, they're making prints. There's certain chemicals that have to be in a temperature range of 1 degree. And if you guess wrong and you guess that wrong degree, they're going to ruin their film or they're going to ruin their photographs. So he said, I know it's a humbling thing to do because, and believe me, it was for me. There were 17 salespeople and I was 17 when I started out of the 17. And so that became my litany. I don't know, but I'll ask someone who does. Now, the good news was you end up with a storehouse of knowledge and you have to ask fewer and fewer times, which is a relief because it was very humbling to always be grabbing somebody's elbow and say, what is this? What's a Leica? What's a Hasselblad? What does this do? What does that do? So I brought that philosophy into real estate because This is an overwhelmingly intimidating business when you first start out. I know there's people that are relatively new in the business. And it's a challenge because you're trying to acquire that storehouse of knowledge. And it is humbling to go to Amy and to Mike and all the time and say, can you explain this contingency, how this works if you have to sell a house? But the good news is, A, you've got tremendous resources here. B, that's the way you learn. And hopefully one day you will pass that along to someone else. Building relationships is to me a cornerstone of becoming successful in this business. And those relationships are with a wide range of people. So to give you some examples, title staffers, structural engineers, inspectors, mortgage people, city assessors, staffers. That's a big one in my mind. Get to know those people on a first name basis. The more you establish those relationships, the more you have those conduits to call people with those questions I was just talking about. So if you have a tremendous transaction with an attorney and you get the sense that this person really cares and they know what they're doing, grab that attorney's card, send them a thank you note, send her a thank you note and say, would it be okay if once in a while I call if I have a question or if I have a customer to refer to you? They're grateful for that. Most people are generous of spirit enough to receive that. And if they do that, and if someone asks you for a name of a local attorney, give them that person's name and say, hey, Amy sent me. And they appreciate the fact that Amy sent them, and they're grateful for the referral, but also it heightens that relationship. So if Amy calls with a legal question of that attorney, they're much more apt to answer it quickly and respond to her call. Same thing is true of title people. I have tremendous respect for Michael's family. His family is like a dynasty in real estate. And one of the relationships in terms of people that I trusted the most was with his mom, Stacy, and Rick Smith, the president of Michigan Title, because I knew if I had a title question and I asked Stacy or I asked Rick, I didn't have to ask anybody else. I didn't have to get a second or third or fourth opinion about that question. They told me, I took that as gospel and I ran with it. They never steered me wrong. Second best advice I ever got, don't attach yourself to the personal outcome. This was from one of the national speakers. I don't know if it was Mike Ferry or Floyd Wickman, but somebody like that. I had no idea what that meant. I asked them because it was on the chalkboard when you walked into the class. And he said, I believe it was Mike Ferry. He said, one of the ruts that realtors get into is attaching themselves to the personal outcome of the transaction. In other words, the commission. You list a property, you go to show a property, especially if it's a pricey property. And this is human nature. We've all done it. You mentally calculate the commission. He said, that's fine. That's human nature, but don't attach yourself to that outcome. Attach yourself to the process. What's best for my buyer if you're representing the buyer as a buyer client? What's best for this seller if it's a listing? Take care of every little step along the way. That outcome will take care of itself. And at the end of the day, end of the process, there will be a commission check for you. If you focus strictly on the money that's to be made in this business, things can fall through the cracks in terms of what you should be doing for your buyers and sellers that you're not doing. Become an expert at things that matter. I'm the least mechanically inclined person you'll ever meet your whole life. I can't do anything mechanical, but what I found was I didn't have to be an expert in that stuff because there's a lot of experts that I could refer to and get a hold of. However, there are things in real estate that I think it's really important to become experts on. My foundation was Wyandotte. I lived real close to here and I worked here for a long time. My thing was to memorize the city inspections in Wyandotte as best I could, get to know the assessor's office people in Wyandotte, get to know the engineering department in Wyandotte, so that when I had a question, they would answer the question for me in a prompt way. The reason it was important for me is the time. It's different now. At the time, Wyandotte was one of the few cities downriver that had city inspections, city certs. Now, during the recession, it became a real big thing as a moneymaker. So Woodhaven and a lot of other cities jumped on that bandwagon. But Dearborn was the first. Wyandotte was the second. At one point, the mayor of Taylor came to the mayor of Wyandotte, Mayor DeSena, and said, our housing stock is newer than yours here in Wyandotte. Your values consistently are going up higher than the city of Taylor's values are going up. And at the time, Taylor didn't have city certs. And Mayor DeSena gave him a copy of the city certs and said, this changed everything for us, which it did. In the late 70s, early 80s, huge sections of Wyandotte were owned by investors from the northern suburbs. I don't know why it happened that way, but that's where they were from, who were absentee landlords. I mean, they would come down if they absolutely had to, but they were not psychically invested in improving these homes. City certs came on board, 79, 80, copied from the city of Dearborn. And the landlords looked at those lists upon resale and say, we don't want it, or upon city inspections in terms of even if they weren't selling it, they were keeping the property, they had to have it inspected. Well, one by one, they started selling it. They didn't want to be involved with all that. Well, who they sold it to were either the tenants of the property or other Wyandotte families, because it's a very parochial city. People love this city. And all of a sudden, the housing stocks went up. And when I got in the business, I saw it. I would show homes, not to pick on Lincoln Park, but I would show homes in Lincoln Park that had a 60 amp fuse box. And it was just passed along from buyer to seller, buyer to seller, buyer to seller. Meantime, every generation of kids that came along had more and more things to plug in, and the mom and dad were always changing fuses. And in the city of Wyandotte, when that city search came on in 7980, if you had a 60 amp fuse box, guess what? You had to upgrade it to 100 amp. Be it fuses or circuit breakers, it had to be 100 amps. So I got deep into the weeds in terms of learning about the city inspection process, meeting the inspectors, talking to them. They're particularly tough to get return phone calls from if you've ever tried to do that. So I wanted to have relationships with them so that they would call me back and answer my questions. Millage rates. The cities that I dealt with the most, in my phone, I would put their homestead and non-homestead millage rates as a reminder to myself of all the cities that I did the most business in. So if I had access to an SEV of a property, I was able on my phone or in the field to be able to calculate pretty closely what the uncapped taxes were going to be. Learn how to explain that. It's still, to me, the most misunderstood concept, because I still get a lot of calls from people, is one of the most misunderstood concepts in real estate is the effect of the SEV upon the taxes as opposed to the sale price. I had a conversation with a very intelligent man yesterday, and he was saying, I'm afraid about offering X amount of dollars for this commercial building because the taxes, by virtue of what I offer, are going to be so great. And I said, there's no relationship between what you offer and what you pay for the property and taxes. And it took a while to convince him that that was true, and explain to him about the SEV. Become an expert on that. That's an important thing to become an expert on. Zoning laws and master plans. Not everybody, I mean, that's dry material and not a lot of people want to get into it. However, if you go to any city hall, anywhere in our metro area, they will sell you the master plan for that city for $1, $2, $3, $4. I don't know what they are now. I don't think I ever paid more than $3 for one. I collected those. I had an accumulation of those. The reason being that if somebody wanted to know, can I put this restaurant or bar in this section of the city, I would just pull out the master plan and see, let's see what the master plan calls for. No, that master plan in Wyandotte in particular, all of Biddle, the master plan is to have medical offices. And so the ones that are going to get preferential treatment are the people who buy empty lots and put up medical offices. Why? Because Wyandotte Hospital is the second biggest taxpayer in the city after BASF. Not that the hospital generates that much taxes, it's the doctors that work at that hospital that generate the taxes. So if they have an opportunity, they want to sell a building that's going to a lot that's going to end up being a $3 or $4 million building because of the taxes that's going to generate for them. So zoning laws, even though it's dry, master plans, try to get to know them. This is the only money section of the chat this morning. One of the things that was recommended to me, because there's no new ideas in real estate, was to become a notary. And it was one of the best pieces of advice I ever got. Cost-wise, I looked it up because I haven't looked it up recently. Out the door, maybe $130, $135. You have to buy a surety bond, and you have to a couple of $10 fees to the state of Michigan to become a notary. I can't overstate how much business I got because I was a notary, and I was shocked at that. I went so far as I have all the designations that you can get in real estate. I didn't put any of them on my business card, but I put notary public on my business card. And I would get the business card out, and I can't tell you how many times people would say, oh my God, we've been looking for a notary. And the reason it's become such a great service for a realtor to offer is that going back to the 80s and the 90s, you could go in any bank anywhere and there'd be a notary and they wouldn't charge you for the service. Well, then they all adopted rules that we can't notarize anything unless it's a part of a transaction we're involved with. And all of a sudden the availability of notaries went way, way down. So it was a huge tool for me in terms of gaining new business. And again, getting back to customer service, people would keep that card and they would call me and say, you know, we've got some insurance papers to be notarized for my husband and wife, fill in the blank. I say, I'll come to the house. I just need to know if they're staying in Michigan or going outside the state, because there's a seal if it goes outside the state. And I would go and they would be flabbergasted because we never notaries don't charge. I don't know if they do now, but we never did. And I never wanted to charge for that service. But I've notarized things in hospitals for people. I've notarized things everywhere you can imagine. You have to be very careful with that. If you've never been a notary, be careful that in this day and age, unfortunately, there are people who will try to scam you. I had somebody right toward the end of my career ask me to notarize something. The person was in the car, according to them, and they were aged and they couldn't walk from their car to the office, but could you just notarize their signature? And I said, no. I said, I'll go to the car and I'll witness their signature. And all of a sudden, well, you know what? It's a bad day for that for them. We'll do it another day. Okay, that person wasn't who you were telling me that they were. So be careful with that. But I'll tell you what, it's not a hard thing that you do. It's not a difficult process to become a notary. It's invaluable. Next point I wanted to make is just know your limits. I had a young man that was working for us, and everybody wants that first or second or third listing. They're so excited about it. And an aunt of his inherited a property in Alpena, Michigan, up toward the thumb. And she wanted him, because she knew he was in real estate and she loved her nephew, to come and list the property. And he said, what do you think? And I said, it's a big no for me. And he said, well, what are you talking about? We were at the Wynette office. And I said, how much do you know about Alpena? Did you grow up there? No, grew up in Southgate. Okay. So it's a disservice to your family and to your aunt and to the person who owns that house, your aunt in this case, to say, yes, I'll take the listing. Just getting a sign in front of it's going to be a chore, by the way. But then when people start calling off that sign and they're calling you directly, what are the schools like around there? Is there a fire department anywhere close to that house? What's the crime like in that area? And then if your answers are consistently, I don't know, I don't know, I don't know. It's not a question of asking somebody who does know. It's a question of why did I take that listing in the first place? Because you're out of your element at that. That's what referrals are for. So there's a tendency to take on everything, but try to realize where your strengths are as far as geographical areas. And then if you know Trenton like the back of your hand, you don't have to think about the answers. It's all very reflexive to you. I always preach, do the things that are not fun to do. Nobody wants to ever hear about these, but, and it's going to sound strange to some of you, but I accompanied every single inspection that my buyers had on the house, including the private inspection. I know that's not a popular concept. However, it really created tremendous relationships for me, because they would ask me why I was there. The other realtor would always question why I was there. And my response was, especially being a non-mechanically inclined person, I don't want to hear about a problem third hand or fourth hand from either the inspector or the buyers who is trying to translate what the inspector told them in the first place. And I said, I always wanted to do the follow the finger rule. I want to be there and and I would always just be out of sight in terms of not being in their way, but I was in the house and I would have the inspector literally follow his finger and say, you got to see this. And whatever he was pointing at, I wanted to see it firsthand. That was number one. Number two, the anxiety level for a buyer on the day of a private home inspection is sky high. And so the purpose of me being there was just to alleviate that anxiety a little bit. And I never knew what kind of inspector I was going to be encountering. And I'm sure you've all seen this. There are incredible people who do home inspections. There are people who should never, ever, ever be doing home inspections. I had a chance to do Governor Granholm years ago, and it was a round table and people asking for ideas. And I popped up with 2 ideas. I said, everybody in Michigan should have 2 homesteads. Their home, and if they have a vacation home, they should have that one homestead, because it would encourage people to buy more property. And number 2, licensed home inspectors. I'm licensed, everybody's licensed except the person who's really a critical part of the procedure. In my opinion, they should be licensed. So we've all seen it. I've seen incredibly knowledgeable people do home inspections. I accompanied one on a house on Roseville. I think it was around 4,200 square feet. I knew it was going to be a lengthy one, brought a bunch of paperwork to do, which was how I spent my time at the house. And it was literally 20 minutes later, the inspector popped up from the basement and said, we're good. I'm done. 20 minutes on a 4,200 square foot home. And I can only imagine what he charged, but whatever he charged was just highway robbery, in my opinion, because you can't do 4,200 square. You can barely see 4,200 square feet in 20 minutes if you're showing the house. And I always attended my closings. I don't know how often people don't attend their closings. I have encountered it personally, though, where I've been at a closing and the other agent wasn't there. Now, I understood during the recession about all the HUD properties and the bank owned. I didn't fault anybody for not coming to those if it was their listing. I greatly was suspicious of the practice of having a family that you're representing and the families at the closing signing the papers, and you're not there as the listing agent. I personally had big problems with that. I can tell you that it would put me in a lot of awkward situations where I had the buyer, the other agent who had the seller was not there, and the seller is looking at papers, and now they're looking at me for the answers. And that's fine. I mean, the fiduciary stuff is coming to an end as far as relationships go. But I often thought, boy, those questions should not be answered by me. They should be answered by the person who's also getting paid today, by the way, who listed the property. And this to me is the last impression that you have with your clients. And if you're not there, I don't think it's a very good impression. And especially if something goes sideways at the closings. We've had those, we've all experienced those. The wire is incredibly late, 2, 3, 4 hours. Just everybody's heads are exploding because there's no money. You want somebody holding their hand, and that person should be the listing agent. Never disparage realtors to consumers. It's part of our code of ethics. It should be in practice for everybody. In that example I just gave, they were fishing with me to say something negative about their realtor because their realtor wasn't there, and I didn't take the bait. It's not my place. It's the golden rule. I don't want to be criticized in front of my clients. I don't want to criticize that realtor in front of their clients. It's an easy thing to do. There's a tremendous level of frustration in this business. The anxiety is not confined to buyers and sellers. There's a ton of anxiety dumped upon realtors. The public's expectation of us, our reputations, everything. So to Amy's point earlier, the reason I started doing that, and I did that early in my career complimenting other realtor, was that I had a realtor on the other side of a transaction who had done a tremendous job, but I witnessed, because the people were home for showings, that they were very abusive of their realtor verbally. They just were very disparaging. And so I made a point at saying at the closing, I can't tell you what a tremendous job Mary did for you. I said, I work with a lot of realtors. You need to know that Mary really represented you well, knowing that they were not very kind to Mary, but I wanted to put that on record. And they looked at her and I think they felt a little sheepish. It's like, oh, she did? And I go, yeah, she really did. And I continued that ever since then. I don't know how many of you farm. I farmed expireds my first 3 or 4 years. I had great success with that. I didn't like FSBOs. I just didn't like the concept of chasing down FSBOs. Some people are tremendous at that. I worked with a woman from, she was a colleague. She wasn't in our office. She was at a Century 20 office in Lincoln Park. Did a phenomenal job with FSBOs, put together a package and paperwork, her card, and to her card, she packaged a 2-pill parcel of Bayer aspirin. And selling your home is a headache. I can help. Silly. I can't tell you how many people called and laughed. They said, aspirin made us call you. We really found that kind of funny. It was an inexpensive way for her to do that. There was another realtor who put ads in the News Herald, and it would be a small classified ad. In big type, it said, "Hey, veteran!" exclamation point. She became an expert at VA, which is, as you know, if you don't do a lot of VA, you're constantly relearning VA, veterans loans. And so you're constantly going to people like Jacques. I don't know who else you use, but I know he's an expert locally downriver on VA loans. Align yourself with somebody like Jacques where you have that question, because the VA, like many governmental agencies, and I've always picked on the city of Dearborn in terms of their city certs, they like to change things up every 3 or 4 months and not tell us. So every time you list another property in Dearborn, you got to relearn Dearborn codes. VA is like that. And I think it's because my brother works for the VA, so I'm not talking out of school on this one. They love changing their rules. I mean, they just do. It's just the government. And so she became an expert. She constantly was getting newsletters and updates and everything to do with the VA loans, because people would respond to that ad. And basically the ad went on to say, I can get you into a home with 0 down, X amount of dollars closing cost. I mean, we can do this very economically. And she became a great realtor at VA. That was her niche. That was her specialty. With me, with expireds, I came up with a line that worked incredibly well for me. I would ask for a meeting with the sellers, and they were being inundated with postcards and calls and text and everything else. You know, I see your home's expired. Can I, I'd like to list your house. And I would always ask for a meeting. And you're meeting people there who have been trying to sell their home for several months, who are very frustrated with the realtors. And so my very first question out of the gate, which I found very disarming, was, I'd really like to know why you think your house didn't sell. Full stop, pregnant pause. I want to hear what you have to say. Oh my God, the floodgates would open up. Well, we begged them to do an open house and they wouldn't do an open house because they told us that open houses don't sell houses. Well, I'll do an open house next Sunday if that works for your schedule. Sometimes the requests were very unrealistic. We wanted a full color ad in the News Herald or on cable TV once a week. Can't afford to do that. It's not the best use of my money or time. But if they ask for anything within the boundaries of realism, we really like, when we go to see houses, we like that the fact sheet sitting out on the kitchen table. No problem, we'll do that. So if you overcome their objections at that point, it's very disarming for them to say, okay, this person's empathically listening to why I think our house didn't sell. And I said, I'm not going to do an open house every Sunday, but I said, it's the least I can do as a thank you for your listing. I'll do one Sunday for you. If you're new in the business or relatively new, I was so green, and I had a broker, Nancy Keith, who hired me, and she always carried 60, 70, 80 listings at a time. That was always my goal. You mentioned my numbers, but my goal was inspired by Nancy carrying that many listings at a time. And I would go to Nancy literally every Monday or Tuesday and say, who's bugging you for an open house? Because you can't do 80 of them. I know that. You can't do 70 of them this Sunday. She goes, oh, I got a really cute house in Trenton. And you want to hold it open? I do. She says, I'll pay for the ad. We're good. So it was no money out of my pocket. I went to the open house. I started getting business. And the traditional wisdom on open houses is you only do them because you're going to meet buyers at the open house. I got a lot of listings off of open houses, because if you handle yourself professionally and you present the house well and you discuss its flaws, and you discuss its merits, you answer people's questions, they go, you know what, we're looking for somebody to sell ours. And this happened more than once with me. And I picked up a listing basically because I was just trying to get toehold into the business and meet people. So that can work out. I want to talk about commercial. I ended up just kind of falling into commercial. Clients who I'd sold 3 or 4 homes for, and then they would have a store and they were closing the store and they say, can you sell it? Well, I didn't like the idea of automatically just saying, no, you got to call a commercial realtor. So I made it my business to learn whatever I could about that world. And I found that the commercial realtors of the world love to have residential realtors think that it's an incredibly difficult process and it's incredibly intimidating. It can be. Bars are tough to sell. I've sold bars, they're a pain. Gas stations, really, really, really tough. Bump shops, incredibly tough because of what's going on underneath the ground of a bump shop. You know, underground storage tanks and all the rest of that. However, set those aside, a store, just a retail freestanding store, no different than selling a house. I mean, you got to go through some hoops in terms of what it's zoned for, what it can be. This is part of becoming an expert. You got to become an expert on that building. So you've got to go to that city hall and say, I'd like to know about the master plan. Again, zoning laws, what's it zoned for? How does this city do its inspections? So sometimes it feels counterintuitive. Wyandotte, we preach people to all the time, get that inspection done right away. It's critical. Trenton, lots of cities now. With Wyandotte, I'll give you Wyandotte as an example. They won't do a commercial inspection until they know who's buying the building, what they're going to put in there. So it's completely the inverse of residential. So you need to know that process. Some cities, to me, during the recession, it became the source of income for them. So it went from a $200 application fee to a $750 application fee for a site plan. And you had to bring 5 copies of whatever it is you were doing. And in some cases, I just think that it was just gouging. You know, the site plan for a donut shop is not terribly complicated. It shouldn't have been a $750 charge. It is what it is. But don't be intimidated by trying your hand at that. Again, I was very reticent to give that business away, not out of a covetousness or not out of greed so much as I sold 4 homes for this family. I did a great job on all 4. Now I'm trusting something that's important to them, their family business store, let's say, to somebody, maybe somebody I don't know all that well that does commercial in that area. I'd rather take a shot at that and learn it. And you've got great resources here to learn from. You do. Which brings me to a really, probably one of my most important points today. Rely upon Mike, rely upon Amy. If there's questions that come up during the day, if there's things that you encounter that just don't, lawyers have a tremendous expression called it doesn't pass the smell test. If something's just not striking you as the right thing that you're being asked to do, or just anything unusual, bring it to these guys. They know. And so early on in my career, I was going after a listing on Roseville because that's where my office was, and loved this house and really wanted this listing. It was just a beautiful home, great gardening, great gardens, everything. And the seller and I were really hitting it off. And we sat down at the kitchen table. She goes, you're the guy. I want you to sell the house. I said, thank you. I'm going to work hard on this. And she goes, here's a list of people that are not allowed to buy it. And I said, individuals' names? She goes, oh, no, just ethnicities. She said, I love my neighbors and I'm not going to have you sell it to A, B, C, D, or E. And I said, well, we can't even have this conversation. You're asking me to break several federal and state laws. So no, that's not going to happen. She goes, that's a condition of the listing. I said, well, it's not my listing then. I said, good luck. But by the way, any realtor with any kind of consciousness who comes here is going to have the same conversation with you about that. I said, that was, 1922. It's not 2002. This doesn't happen anymore, nor should it happen anymore. You have to walk away from listing. However, I took that back to my broker that afternoon and said, I never had been asked that before. How would you have handled it? And we had talked through about that. That's something that you have to have conversation with Mike and Amy about. Those kinds of things they need to be aware of. Why? Because Mike is probably going to get a call, if that would have been me as the salesperson, that afternoon or this evening. I'm really upset with your realtor, Joe. What do you mean? Well, I don't. What did Joe do? He wouldn't take my listing. Well, that doesn't sound like Joe. What happened? Well, I told him I don't want him selling to A, B, C, D, or E, and he wouldn't do it. Okay, Joe is following federal and state law guidelines, and so no. But if I gave Mike a heads up before he gets the call, it's a lot easier call for him to receive. Keep your broker in the loop. The people that mentored me, Amy was very kind to say I mentored her. She was great when I met her. Nancy Keith, the woman that hired me, Ann Redfield, who owns Century 21 River Point, her daughter Trista, will one day be the broker owner there. She's the office manager. And then Stacy and Rick at Michigan Title. Those are the people that I leaned on real heavily all through my career, but especially in the first few years of my career. And again, one day you'll be paying that forward and somebody's going to be relying upon you. Anybody know the word testers? I don't know if that's still something that's talked about.
Yeah.
Okay. Anybody not know what that is?
I've encountered it.
Okay, I have too. Testers are real. Testers are actors and actresses hired by the state of Michigan to role play and to test you, which is where the word comes from. They exist, they're real. I've met them. They've shared with me that they're real. So their job is to try to, for lack of a better word, catch you into doing the things that you're not supposed to be doing. And so I had a couple come to me at the Groseal office. They presented beautifully. Registered nurse, and I forget what he said he did for a living, neither of which ended up being true. They were actors. They wanted to buy a house in the X amount of dollar range. When can we go looking? Can you send us listings? And they were looking to see, did I selectively send them listings? If they were looking for 200 to 300, did I pick and choose among the 200 to 300 where I thought they should live? Or did I send them everything between 200 and 300? Obviously, I sent them everything between 200 and 300. So we started looking at homes, and I asked about a pre-approval letter. I did all the things we're supposed to do. And ultimately they stopped calling me, and I started calling them even more because I wanted their business. And at one point the lady said, my name's not Sally, it's Mary. This is what I do. I work for the state of Michigan. My friend and I were not married. We're what they call testers. I go, I've heard of you, but I've never met one before. So it was eye-opening to me. You've encountered them in real life. What was your experience?
Some very nice black folks wanted to buy in Wyandotte and wanted to see if I would accommodate them. And of course I did. I went through the same routine with every buyer, pre-qualify financially. If you can buy, you're fine.
Good for you.
If you want to live in Wyandotte, I'll show you whatever you want to look at.
Yeah, good for you. Obviously that's the right way to do it. I would have young realtors say to me, why in the world are they spending all this time about civil rights and about the civil rights laws and how they pertain to real estate? That's your generation, Joe. That's the generation before you. That's not our generation. I said, unfortunately, it's as actively being done now as it ever was. One of the new textbooks at Aiden's age that they're going to be teaching real estate, the test case in one of the chapters is from River Rouge, Michigan. This is a national textbook. And it was a man who had his house for sale, and an African-American couple of veterans, matter of fact, showed up with he and his wife, and they put an offer in. He was home for the showing. He was adamant that he wasn't going to sell it to African-Americans. A tester got involved with that from the state of Michigan, a white person, went in, put an offer in $3,000 less than the African-American couple did. He accepted the offer. Everything was documented. Everything was proven to be that he was completely discriminating against them. The reason it found its way into a national textbook from River Rouge, Michigan, is that the seller was a judge. And he was actively discriminating against who could buy the house, and he's a judge. He was a sitting judge. He wasn't a retired judge. He was a sitting judge. So he got into a world of trouble, which he should have, and it made its way into the textbooks. And that's not that long ago. And so when somebody says to me, we don't need all this time on civil rights and equal rights and all that, yeah, we do. because the prejudice unfortunately is still in people's hearts. Single best piece of advice, and it's from Theodore Roosevelt, and I always took it to heart. People don't care how much you know until they know how much you care.
Right.
You have to exude that this is not a business transaction purely, which of course it is, real estate, but they have to understand that you're psychically and emotionally invested in their success. Once they realize that you care, you don't have to be somebody like me who's incredibly unmechanically inclined. So if they start asking me questions about their boiler or their furnace and I don't know, they're not going to hold that against me because they know that I care about the house, about them, that I want the process to go well. Amy and I were talking recently, and I said, you know, one of the beautiful things about real estate is you can be an introvert and be an incredible success. You can be an extrovert, be an incredible success. You can be unmechanical like me, be very successful. You can be incredibly mechanical and be successful. There's type A, type B personalities. There's just room for everybody. It's a big umbrella that we work under, and there's room for all of us. But the one thing that unites every great producer is that they care about the people they meet. They're not attached to that outcome. They're not attached to their paycheck. They're attached to the people being happy. Referrals come from happy, satisfied clients. I stopped advertising probably 4th or 5th year in the business. And then from the 5th year of my business until the day I retired, I literally didn't spend a dime on advertising. None. I had a website that I could control, maintained, but nothing other than that, because it was all, the huge portion of my business came from attorneys. And then the rest of it was just word of mouth. Amy was joking about the photographs. I went to a Century 21 program, and man, at the time they were pushing that. They wanted the magnets on the side of the card. They wanted billboards. They wanted the photo on. And I came back and took my photo off of everything because I modeled myself after the people I wanted to give me business. And the people I wanted to give me business were attorneys. And I never got an attorney's card with their photograph on it. I never saw an attorney with the magnets with their picture on the side. Obviously, there are attorneys who are big narcissists who, they're on TV all day, every day. We all know their names. There's those attorneys, but they never gave me any business. But the ones that gave me business looked like me, dressed like me. Their cards were like me. Their stationery was like mine. They handled themselves like me. And I just prided myself on, if I'm sitting there and there's 2 attorneys talking to me, they are comfortable with me. That was the whole concept. It wasn't because I wanted to dress up every day. It was because I wanted the people to give me a business who were comfortable with working with me. That's where that came from. That's where this comes from. Quick story about, I saw a realtor early on in my career. I had a transaction with them. And just like the experience that Amy and I had, 3-4 months later, I had a second transaction. The first transaction, I found them to be very, very not enthused about the whole process. The second transaction was a family member of theirs, and they went over backwards. Every I was dotted, every T was crossed, every kind of service they could offer, they offered to their family member. It was their listing. And it just dawned on me that I was going to file that away, not only for my business, but when I taught the business one day, if you treat everybody the same way as they treated that family member, if you treat every single listing and sale as if it was your cousin or best friend or brother or sister coming to you for real estate needs, you're going to be really super successful. If you differentiate between those in terms of, I'm going to give certain people A-level service and other people B and C-level service, the success will not follow. So it was just something that really struck me. Oh, I want to talk about anticipating seller. Are we doing okay on time, Amy? Shall I wrap up soon? Okay. Tell me, you just give me a high sign. Anticipate sellers' needs before they ask you, and you're going to get tremendous dividends from that in terms of their appreciation for you. One of my big pet peeves with my realtors that I trained and taught and managed was, right now, this time of year, I'm looking at that window, March and April. I want those snow pictures gone soon. I don't want to see them in the MLS, because a week after the last snow, even if that snow in the picture was a week old, it looks really super dated, let alone if there's Christmas or Halloween decorations on the photograph. So I know that a lot of you hire professional photographers to do all your photography, but if it's a question of 1 or 2 outside exterior snow pictures, there's no reason that with the phones being the way they are, or if you have a good digital camera, just go out and replace those 3 or 4 photographs. And then let the seller know by sending them their own listing and say, hey, don't mean to bother you, but I was by the house the other day. It was a beautiful sunny day. The last of the snows were gone. I took some photographs. really like the way they turned out. Take a look at the listing because I modified that to reflect the fact that we aren't going to have any more snow this year. They didn't ask you to do it. Now, sometimes they will, because if you wait too long, they're going to call and say, can you get rid of the snow pictures? But if you anticipate that, and there's two examples of that. One would be if you're fond of putting the materials on the tabletop in the kitchen, kind of make a mental note like once a week to drop off 25 new ones to them. And again, don't wait for them to say, hey, the last of those is gone now. Anticipate that. And what, they talk about cold touches and warm touches, cold calls, warm calls. Taking the pictures that are not snow and dropping off new materials on their tabletop, both incredibly warm touches because they didn't ask you and yet you fulfilled a need for them. And they say, you know what, even though it hasn't sold, this guy, this woman is on top of this listing and we appreciate that. One last thing, that's about working with people who are at peak anxiety. My kid brother, Amy mentioned, is a very gifted psychologist. And when I got in the business, he gave me a great piece of advice that I wanted to pass along. And that is, when you're experiencing something negative in your life in terms of a life event, if you're going through a divorce, if you've lost a loved one, you have incredible stress put upon you, but you're aware of where that stress, the source of that stress came from. This I didn't know until my brother Jim taught me. He said, when you're going to be meeting people who are experiencing high levels of stress over something very positive in their life, and they're sometimes going to be confused about why they're so stressed out, why they're snapping at their spouse, why they're snapping at you, and they aren't processing that stress real well, even though it's a very positive thing, they're buying a home. And I said, okay, pull the thread on that a little bit more for me. He said, talk to anybody who's planned a wedding. One of the happiest days of a person's life, how stressful was it for them planning it? Everybody's chirping about what they should do and shouldn't do and have it here and have it there. And all of a sudden, what was supposed to be just this really happy event is getting kind of soured by the fact that all this stress is being raised up. So be mindful of that stress. They're spending a tremendous amount of money. If it's a seller and this market changes and we go back to being a buyer's market, the stress upon a seller waiting for that house to sell is very, very high. The buyer spending a lot of money, stress is very high. Keeping their job, stress is very high. Just be mindful of the fact if they do snap at you, it's probably nothing about you personally so much as they're manifesting the stress and they're not really even sure why sometimes. You'll encounter this with hoarders. I've had several hoarders listings in my life. Those are tough. Those are tough. I hesitate to call it a mental illness. I will call it a mental health problem because they get overwhelmed by stuff. And one of the stories Amy was alluding to, this gentleman's house, I walked in, it was to the rafters. I mean, it was tough. And then we went to the garage and he opened up the garage, beautiful brick 2.5 car garage, and you couldn't walk into it literally. And my eyes were trying to figure out what I was seeing. It was one of those surreal moments. And he, over a period of 40 years, World War II veteran, great guy, had accumulated about, I'm guessing now, 10 or 15,000 aluminum trays from frozen dinners. He was a bachelor. And they were all stacked up and cleaned very neatly, half of the garage. Now I moved to the other half of the garage. I couldn't even figure out what they were, but they were similar stacks, floor to ceiling. And it was the old fashioned Big Mac styrofoam containers that the Big Mac hamburger came in. He said, Joe, those are great for storing things. I said, yeah, 2 or 3 of them are great for storing things. But 10,000 of those, he said, but that's aluminum. I said, okay. He said, my kids, and his kids were probably my age at the time. He said, my kids told me you were going to say something about it. And I was very gentle about it. I said, I am going to tell you that I'd love to see the whole garage. I mean, if I'm a buyer, I want to look at the back wall and the side walls and the floor. I can't see anything. I said, this is going to have to come out. Now, they told me you'd probably say that too. What I didn't do was, make fun of him in any way or make fun of his hoarding, because what I learned since then is that hoarding comes from usually one of 3 places are the primary reason it comes. It's the death of a loved one, it's a divorce, or it's someone who's previously lost all their possessions in a fire.
Can't let go.
Difficult letting go. And then when they start accumulating things because they've already had significant losses. And if you think in terms of what unifies those 3 things, is a sense of loss. I'm going to accumulate as much as I can. I'm not going to get rid of any of it because I already went through getting rid of it at one point in my life. That's all I wanted to say. I didn't realize it was going to go this long, Amy. I'm sorry. But thank you for the opportunity. I think the world of Amy, of all the people I've ever mentored and taught, she's on the top of the list and it's not even close. She's that good. And so you were all blessed to have her as a colleague and to know her because of her spirit and her generosity. She's always on that learning curve path. She's always wanting to know more. And by virtue of that, it will make all of you better realtors. And the first chance I've had to meet Mike, I've heard tremendous things about you, and you have a beautiful office. And I love this city. It's a great, you're going to find Wyandotte people love doing business with Wyandotte people. And that's one of the reasons I was so happy to hear about this opportunity for you guys, because we were at the corner of Bill and Elm for 10 years. Jim, that's where I met Jim a million years ago. And oh my gosh, I mean, the business will come to you, and especially when they see that you have Wyandotte roots as far as your office goes. So thank you. Good luck.
So thank you guys all. As you can see, like I learned so much from him. He is just the best heart and the best example of what real estate should be. Like if every realtor thought like this, like how different our industry would be if we really focused on the people versus the sales. I mean, and I aligned with that from the very beginning. I thought that from the very beginning, I'll say that over and over. I used to get kicked like the leads that other people didn't want. Oh, here they're only spending 70,000. They're only spending 60,000. I just treat every single person exactly the same. Treat them as if they are the best thing ever. And then that is all reciprocal. And I just, I feel like the realtors in this room, I feel like I have shared that with you guys over and over. You see the way that I work. And I want that for all of you. Like I want the level of success for all of you. And I can't thank you enough for being here. It means so much to me. And I hope you guys have a great weekend and a great Friday. I saw a couple comments in here. And said it was best introduction. And let's see, Margie says, I'm so glad I tuned in this morning. This has been so valuable. Thank you. Complimenting, it reminds me of my experience with Corey and how I end up at his office. Okay, perfect. All right. Well, thank you guys all so much. I hope you guys have a great weekend and thanks for being here. And thank you again.